Dust lay upon the quiet aisles like a burial shroud. Baxe had known ancient forests whose fallen leaves whispered more loudly than the air within these halls. Even the moats drifting in the sunlight seemed to hesitate, as though wary of disturbing something that preferred not to be remembered. He moved deeper into the archives. The libraries of Caltrotta were not merely forgotten, they were intentionally abandoned. Not ruined, not looted, shunned. Shelves leaned like old gravestones, groaning under the weight of vellum stitched before kingdoms learned their alphabets. It felt as though each corridor watched him as he passed. Something happened here, he thought. Something they didn't want found again. He traced the sigil on the clasp of the final sealed case, the sigil of Thaal the Wise. The seal broke with a sigh, as if exhaling the breath it had held for 1,000 years. Inside was a single bundle of pages, scorched at the edges, re-inked clumsily by later hands. Fragments, layers of languages known and unknown, stitched together in ways that suggested equal parts brilliance and desperation. He unrolled the first sheet. The glyphs bent even as he looked at them, his druidic sight helping little against shapes that wriggled like worms in soil. But he recognized the pattern. Echugid in Nawid, the eyes that conquer heavens. He whispered it aloud once. The lamps fluttered. A coldness crawled up his spine. The Watcher, he thought, because that was the name the spirits had given him in their warnings across the last year. The unseen presence that lurked behind the breach, behind Kud's hunger, behind the thinning of barriers. A being older than forest, older than breath, older than sky. But Thalaran's text made it clear, the name was never meant to be spoken by mortal tongues. All translations are failures. All meanings are only shadows. The next lines were jagged but decipherable. He coveted the mortal world, not its riches nor its dominions, but its living. Baxe swallowed. He wanted us, not our land, not our power, us. Baxe's eyes scanned the parchment with the words, the first chain, the celestial binding, written in the margins at the top of the page. One that described the downfall of the being and the judgment passed by the heavens. The binding was not metaphor, it was law, a law unwritten but enforced by a hierarchy older than gods themselves. The celestial edicts sentenced the conqueror of the heavens to fall, and so he was sealed within the bones of the world he sought to claim. The first chain held him blind, but not gone. Blind. Baxe felt his jaw tighten. Not destroyed, not ended. Blind. The spirits had whispered the same. A watcher without sight, straining in dark silence beneath the world. He continued reading. As long as the celestial hierarchy endures, the first chain cannot break. A tremor went through him, because suddenly, horribly, he understood. Kud. The unnatural incursions, the attacks on mortal spirits, the shattering of boundaries that should never tear. Those actions were not merely monstrous, they were cosmic treason. They were the kind of atrocity that could fracture the order of the heavens themselves. If the spirits fell, if the great tapestry of the spirit chorus unraveled, the celestial hierarchy would break. And if the hierarchy broke, the first chain would break with it. Baxe gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened. Oh, gods, he breathed. He's already beginning to see. He turned to the next layer of the manuscript, this one written not by gods, but by mortals of Caloria after the Great Schism. Fragmented names of ancient houses marked the margins, and in shaky handwriting, the second chain, mortal hands and the 5 pillars. This part Falaran had reconstructed, but admitted doubts about. Still, the meaning was unmistakable. The 5 houses forged the pillars, anchors of oath and blood, woven with the remnants of divine strength. Not built, but sworn. Baxe's mind raced. 5 pillars. 5 anchors that pressed the bones of Caloria tight, sealing shut the Watcher's prison. Not as strong as the celestial chain, but necessary, because if the first chain ever weakened, the pillars were the last defense. His breath caught as he reached the marginal note written in a different hand. If 1 pillar falls, the others strain. If 2 fall, the world cracks. If 3 fall, the bones loosen. If 4 fall, the eyes open. If the 5th falls, the Watcher awakens. The page that followed had been torn out violently. Baxe did not understand immediately, but the text named each pillar, all except 1. 1 entry had been scraped clean, scrubbed violently, but a later scribe had made a note in the margin. The pillar of bond, the line of the 5th house. Baxe's heart froze. Bond. A pillar of bloodline. He felt his pulse pounding suddenly, painfully. Din Hispis, the high priest of the Kintaf, one of the last whose wisdom the Arwen revered, the one whose desperate measures had shaped Caloria's fate after the schism. Falaran's notes hinted at this, but Baxe knew. He knew. Din Hispis saw the end of his own people, the fading of the Kintaf, the slow death of his house, the crumbling of their strength, and if the bloodline ended, the pillar of bond would fall. But Din Hispis had created a pact, a passing of the pillar into the blood of men, into one bloodline in particular, into Ras Hora. Baxe staggered back from the table. If the bloodline of Ras Hora ends, if the last heir is lost, if their lineage dies, the pillar of bond collapses, and the Watcher's prison begins to unravel. Not partially, not symbolically. Baxe pressed both hands to his face, breathing hard. Kuud's assault on the spirit world, the thinning of barriers, the death of the Kintaf bloodline, the fraying of the celestial law. It all aligned. Kuud was not acting alone, not acting randomly, not acting out of hunger. He was acting as the harbinger, breaking the first chain, weakening the second, preparing the world. Because the Watcher, Echugid Yunawud, the conqueror of the heavens, is beginning to wake. And if the last heir of Ras Hora falls, if the pillar of bond breaks, there will be nothing left to stop him. Baxe looked back down at the torn and scorched manuscript. Soon, the world would need to know. Baxe stood in the dim hush of the archives, the pages of Falaran's manuscript trembling slightly in his grip. The lamps sputtered, as if reacting to the weight of his thoughts. It was suddenly difficult to breathe. Eos. There is no time left.